When the children of Israel continued to endure great hardship as slaves in Egypt, they cried out in despair. And God heard their cry and came to deliver them out of death and into life. The Exodus experience then began at the shore of the Red Sea. And God said to Moses, "Tell the people to go forward." And then God opened up a way where there was no way. And the people marched dry-shod through the sea and reached the other side. Jesus seems to be reflecting on the Exodus journey after the feeding of the 5,000 in the wilderness. Today's gospel begins with the crowd crossing in boats to the other side of the sea. They crossed just as the disciples before them had crossed in boats, but Jesus chose to walk on the water. And they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Maybe they were a bit curious about his preferred mode of transportation. But this is not a faith statement. They address him only as rabbi, as teacher, which is why Jesus answers them, "You are looking for me because you ate your fill of the loaves." The crowd then responds to Jesus' claim just as the woman of Samaria had done when told about the gifts of the water of life. She said, "Sir, give me this water." And they say, "Sir, give us this bread always." Neither she nor they understand its true meaning at this point. But then Jesus makes this declaration which draws together both stories. "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." The writer of the fourth gospel is answering the human lament that we know well through the Rolling Stones song, "I can't get no satisfaction." John is saying that we can get satisfaction. It's in this relationship with Jesus. We hear the lament of the children of Israel in chapter 16, verse 2, exactly one verse out of Egypt. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses. "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by our flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. You have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." They've eaten Pharaoh's bread, a bread baked out of scarcity and anxiety for so long that they can't imagine anything else. God gives different bread, a bread of abundance. Manna, is the Hebrew word. It's a word that children have been saying ever since whenever parents put food before them they've never seen before. It's roughly translated, "Ooh, what is this?" The strange thing about this bread is that it's everyday bread, and it's enough for every day. Unlike our economies, no one is excluded from God's abundance. This bread satisfies the hunger of the human family. Here's a picture. When you're at an event and somebody takes a group picture, what do you see when you first look at the photo? You look for yourself, don't you, to see how you look in the picture. So God is trying to move us from a me experience to a we experience. For 40 years, God journeyed with the children of Israel, and it took 40 years for them to see themselves not as slaves, but as sons and daughters, brothers and sisters. Moving to a new identity is not easy. The first step is the hardest, and we're always tempted to turn back. Sister Helen Prejean, author of Dead Man Walking, said that the first part of her journey came when God called her to move into the inner city. She moved into the St. Thomas housing projects in New Orleans, and she said it was like she'd moved into another country. One day in January of 1982, right there in the housing project, a friend said, "Hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal to somebody on death row?" And she said, "Sure." Patrick Sonnier was the convicted killer of 2 teenagers, sentenced to die in the electric chair of Louisiana's Angola State Prison. Eventually, Patrick asked Sister Helen to come visit him. The prison's in a remote area reached by sparsely traveled 2-lane roads. Helen's journey to Angola was the second event that changed her life. I remember about 17 years ago, Sister Helen Prejean stood here in the center of our church. She told us about her journey to minister to the inmates on death row. She shared her anxiety when she walked into the room for her first face-to-face meeting. What did he look like, she wondered. She told us that when her eyes met Patrick Sonnier, she couldn't believe what he looked like. And then she looked around the church and she said, "He looked like any one of us. It could have been you, or even you." She came to know Patrick as a lonely man, searching for love and acceptance. Patrick asked her to be the witness at his execution. And she told him, "I want the last face you see in this world to be the face of love. So you look at me when they do this thing, and I'll be the face of love for you." Sister Prejean remembers describing the execution she had witnessed to Pope John Paul II before he began his own reworking of the Catechism in the mid-1990s. She asked, "Where is the dignity in this death?" And she encouraged Pope John Paul II, "Can you help the Church solidify its opposition to the death penalty?" So St. John Paul II revised the Catechism to say that the need to execute anyone in order to protect society was very rare, if not practically non-existent, given the capacity of modern incarceration facilities. But this past Thursday, on August the 2nd, Pope Francis announced a further revision to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. He first articulated this revision last October. The Church teaches, in light of the gospel, that the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. The Church, he said, calls on all Catholics to work toward its global abolition. Sister Helen Prejean called it a happy day, 1,600 years in the making. The huge thing, she said, is the recognition by the Church of the inviolable dignity even of guilty people who have done terrible crimes. All human beings are worth more than the worst thing we've done in our life. Is that not the message of Jesus to all of us? The bent of the gospel, Sister Helen said, is always going to be toward life. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty.